welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on the smart energy. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. David. Speak, Mr. David, what you want to share about smart energy process?
Well, Sharif, thank you. Smart energy is a very interesting topic as we look at it because smart energy really is the process of using devices for energy efficiency. And it focuses really on powerful, sustainable, renewable energy sources that help us begin to meet the COP challenges from the United Nations initiatives. Also, smart energy uh, tends to also be one that is has a lot of sensors involved with it, a lot of software programs optimizing it, and can be adaptive to meet the needs of the environment around itself. Which these are some very important considerations. And today's modern economy, in our global economy, with the issues we're facing, particularly around environmental targets and others, smart energy is becoming more and more important, with really foreign-looking companies beginning to make smart energy systems a priority. And it's going to benefit many of us around. Now, there's multiple types of smart energy, and there's base smart energy. Then we've talked on prior shows with you, Sharif, about the diversity of energy sources and how that goes into a smart energy equation. We've also talked about how the grid is changing and how the grid is going from really a flat grid to ones of mini and microgrids. And each of these microgrids become more increasingly smart to serve the areas around them. And that's a consideration, particularly the developing countries should take and understand, is this rapid growth of mini and microgrids. Because if I look particularly in the developing nation, that gives them the ability to customize the appropriate match of energy generation sources, look to see what can be used in others, and how that can work to the developing nation's advantage. Um, so, we've heard of smart phones, we've heard of smart TVs, and we've heard of all these other things, but it's that when I look at smart energy, it's not a one for one type of analysis because the potential uses of smart energy are so vast, uh, and you begin to see it. One of the definitions you're beginning to see around smart energy, and I do not think this is always necessarily the case, but it's one that's very common, is that it has to be renewable. And renewable energy comes from non-depletable sources that won't run out. And solar energy has become one of those big areas to harvest in renewable energy. And this is kind of interesting as you look at the market size. So if I look at the global smart energy market size back in 2019, it was valued at right at $125 billion. And it is projected to reach almost $300 billion by 2027. So it's growing at a compound annual growth rate of a little bit over 10%. And it's not only is it a cost effective and sustainable type of energy, increasingly the definitions are saying it must be a secure energy system, which focuses on not only the sustainable energy production while producing the production costs, but it has to be secure. And uh, just today, a new report came out in the United States on threats to the critical infrastructure system. And the smart energy market is part of that critical infrastructure, which is there. And you see that. So some of the other elements, though, of the smart energy system consist of smart electricity, smart gas, smart thermal grids, smart geothermal uh, grids, ways to optimize the use of hydropower in a very smart area, and even newer, more exotic approaches, such as generating power out of the atmosphere, using kinetic sources to generate power. And we talked, Sharif, on an earlier program about some of the new entrepreneurial approaches where they are putting small electric generators on trains that run across the country. And they're using the movement of the train wheels to generate electricity to charge batteries on the train, which are then dropped off at points on the path, and new batteries are added to the train as a way to generate really pretty clean energy, pretty smart energy, and a very simplistic way using the resources that are there. Uh, and you begin to see how that can be used. The other place that you're seeing a ton of investments today is, and this is actually, Sharif, when we talked earlier about Nikola Tesla and some of his inventions, this is one of the places he was focusing way back then, and it is in the smart grid technology. And it's one of the major drivers I see going forward in the smart energy marketplace. And so what you're seeing is that you're seeing smart grids, ways to convert meters, for example, from old analog style to smart digital ones to help control the power use and optimization. We're seeing even the wires and the ways to transmitting increase as we begin to see low temperature, I'm sorry, high temperature superconductivity increasingly being used. We're seeing graphene and other materials now being applied to transmission lines to increase their efficiency. And we're seeing that this has a very strong effect going on other. Tesla particularly wanted wireless energy transmission, and we're seeing that happening in some real interesting demonstration projects around the world today. The challenges though with smart energy is sometimes it requires some high capital investments, and you have to integrate some fairly complex technologies to make it work in there. And you can see how this really can go play. The largest region today for smart energy is the Asian Pacific area, and with North America coming in right after that. So, for example, in China, the Chinese Southern Power Grid is just announced an investment of over 25 billion for a smart grid in the Pearl River Delta region of China. And you begin to see how that plays. But the growth is just being fairly significant as we grow. And again, it's made up of many different segments, including, as I said, the smart grids, digital oil fields as part of that, uh, commercial and home energy management systems. And the end user type actually is across all those residential, industrial, commercial, and others as you begin to try to make it work and understand the impacts. Like I said, solar energy, a very important part of it. Solar energy still has some challenges that the materials to construct the solar cells are not really green in themselves. It takes more energy to produce them than they generate for a while. And also, the life cycle in parts of the world are very limited for some of the solar cells. For examples where there's high sand movements, where salt and other things will set up on it. You have to do a fair amount of maintenance. But you begin to see that as well. Natural gas tends to be another popular renewable energy. Unlike uh, fossil fuels, unlike the oil and gas, natural gas burns cleaner emissions that really don't have much of an effect on the environment. In that way, it's said that uh, natural gas actually presents one of the problems, though. In order to get uh, the clean energy use of gas, natural gas, it has to be burned in proper facilities. And so you see that happen. The The critics are pretty interesting. The Union of Concerned Scientists notes that our current energy grid, the transmission lines and the transformers and how that's put together is really too outdated to handle new forms of energy. And the Union of Concerned Scientists believes that the entire energy grid must be overhauled. And it includes, like I said, the different control stations, the power lines, the transformers, and these need to be updated. I believe as we look at mini and microgrids, which we've talked about with you, Sharif, numerous times, that is actually the way to do this, is begin to look at those and go to more and more where we can, a concept called point of use power generation. And that point of use power generation is, I think, one of the keys for being effective, particularly, Sharif, again, in developing nations, because precision power is one of the things you want when you look at smart energy. You do not want large variations. You don't want to have voltage spikes. You don't want to have voltage surges. And you do not want to go under voltage. The same token, you want the phases to stay coherent and things like that. So that type of control of it is easier to do in a mini or micro grid. It's across a wide area grid uh, situation. And but I do want to stress to you, and particularly to the government people who and listen to this, is that the there is a need for electric grid overhaul to work with smart energy. And you can see that. Also, the grid needs to be modified where uh, wind power, where solar power, and others can be inserted at any point around the smart grids. Our grids in the past, even though they tend to be interconnected, still tend to go from a massive generation source out to distribution with not any injections in the middle. So part of that has to change. Uh, but because so much of the current grid technology is outdated, it's even at times very unreliable. And we're going to see that as we do this, the grid has to change to make it where we don't overload it and that it can be used in different ways there. There's so many different reasons for it and so many different ways you can use it. You begin to look at homes. What can you do to make homes smart? What can you do to make offices, manufacturing facilities, all of these types of things? How can you begin to go back and make them smart? And I think you will see that uh, come time and time again in the future. Uh, the other place that we see here is that when I began to look at all of the systems, including the smart grids, and throw in the smart home and smart offices, the actual market's going to grow faster. It's going to grow almost at a 27% compound annual growth rate between now and 2030. And it's going to increase by almost $950 billion during that time. So you'll see increasing adoption of the smart grid. You're seeing increasing demand for energy efficient solutions. And quite honestly, you're going to see a lot of governmental incentives and governmental initiatives to promote the sustainable energy practices that smart uh, energy are going to require. And it really is how that happens. The other big thing you see with smart energy, Sharif, is in the past, our electricity lines and things tended to be one way. It was transmitted from where the power was generated to where it's used. What is happening today is that that paradigm is changing. And one of the most significant technology advances in the energy sector is that these smart grids and these smart energy sources are becoming two-way. where they communicate not only at the source in the one-way transmission, but now it becomes a two-way information change between the utility, the consumer, the corporation, which enables real-time monitoring, real-time adaptation, real-time variations in billing and consumption, and how do they optimize that energy uh, distribution. Uh, and like I said, part of what you have to do as you do this is you have to look at new ways to facilitate the integration of all these different types of technologies into the grid, and particularly to facilitate how mini microgrids can play with that and and how it can work. The global adoption is beginning to gain momentum right now. You have countries implementing policies and initiatives. You know, for example, early this year in UK, the government announced that smart meters would be fitted in all the homes in UK by the end of next year, which is a great way to begin to help push it towards that way. And we're seeing in the APAC region of the world, in particular, China, India, Japan, South Korea, they are beginning to uh, put increasing emphasis on smart energy, and particularly in China and India, but more so in China, to begin to pull back their impact on greenhouse gases and others into the marketplace, and how that can work and play. The other thing you're seeing is that, particularly in the APEC region, but also in uh, in Africa and South America, you're seeing increased surge in industrialization, and this increased industrialization are one of the key drivers for how do I update the grid? How do I begin to put areas to control the consumption of power? I can tell you, Dr. Sharif, in some of my trips to some of the developing nations, for example, when I go into Haiti, when I go into other countries like that, the energy grid is always a problem. There's times of the day when electricity just isn't there. You see outages. I see that more than I would like to admit globally as we do that. And you begin to understand that energy is necessary of the abilities to handle uh, different ways to do things. And this is an important consideration to both the developing world as well as the developed world, and what we can do with it and how it can work in the different areas. Uh, and the people beginning to fund in this area at the commercial level, but increasingly at the NGO level, are we're seeing dramatically increases at the United Nations through the COPS activity has made trillions of dollars available to both in the past developed nations, but out of the COP this year, increasingly into the developing nations. So, Sharif, I think this is a quick introduction. Let me see if you have questions and we can keep on going.
Thank you, Professor David Smith, for your excellent analysis. I want to know that how we can develop better policy for smart energy, because energy actually very sophisticated issues, and it's run by the government and the government administrators, and it depends on better strategy, better policy. So how we can improve that?
Well, you see a lot of places where you can begin to do that. And I can give you some examples of the policy and the initiatives that we see there. One of the very first ones is when you look at the commercial sector and how it's used is that it it's an easier to implement smart energy systems into the commercial sector than it is in others because you see things like the smart buildings. For example, in the United States, with an act that was passed by Congress here, which is called the Energy Act of 2020s. Uh, Part of it is that a section of it is called Smart Building Acceleration, which really directed the Department of Energy to enable a federal smart building program. And so the goal of that was to have all of our government into smart buildings and demonstrate the benefits of it and to the rest of the commercial area. And one of the key elements of that is what they call a digital integrated building system, which include things like how to reduce energy, how to enhance indoor environmental quality, occupational health, performance, organizational effectiveness. All of these can be impacted by implementing smart energy policies into these smart buildings and you begin to see that put in place and you begin to see the interoperability. Now, just the same uh, caveats I will give on many different things is that uh, there's risk when you begin to do this, particularly some of the cybersecurity concerns. Other types of risk and barriers are the lack of training and education in smart energy and smart buildings and smart grids. There's not in place really good interoperability standards. Interoperability, as we go to the smart part of it, which is increase the digital portion of it, is increasingly part of the concerns there, and particularly with interoperability. Also, one of the places that needs a lot more research, and this is an opportunity for even the universities and colleges in your region and others, is to do what is the life cycle cost? What is the impact data? And you can look at it in so many different areas to provide that going place. Also, in this area of policy, a recent study in the EU uh, said that smart building technology in the EU can save up to 25% of the building's energy use. So, otherwise, to get it there. And again, this includes the heating, ventilation, air conditioning lights, and others that can go into that type of building and there. And but we see that policies are hard to change in this area because they go back so long. And it really is not even increasing. You'll find policy development in this in the energy section, but you'll also find um, policy development that impacts start energy in the communication information technology parts of governments and the regulatory there, uh, particularly in the generation delivery of the electrical energy. Uh, like I said, smart grid technology offers more control over the electricity consumption, but also allows you to go um, in many different areas. The other thing is I begin to look uh, across the globe. I am seeing dozens and dozens of, for example, energy independence and security uh, sections on some of the nations in your region are things like statements on the policy of modernization of the energy grid, smart grids, smart grid technology research and demonstration. A really interesting one is uh, really a consortia coming together to try to develop a smart interoperable framework. And I think that is going to be hopefully very interesting on that. But many governments around the world have stated the goal of promoting smart energy technology, smart grid technology, uh, smart ways to manage the appliances and generation and others, so that you are seeing that. For example, here in the United States, it's not just the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but for example, our National Institute of Standard and Technologies is setting standards here. In the United States, we have an industry group made up of probably over 90% of the industry in the space called EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute. And they have roadmaps out, uh, which I helped them develop their first roadmap. But they have roadmaps out working this whole area of smart energy and what can be done with that. But there's also so many resources that policy developers can use, Sharif, on them. Just it is real easy to look at it in a way that we can look at policies and how it should, and whether it should be a price-based policy, whether it should be a policy directed around sustainability, whether it should be a policy that is focused more on the economic development of the region or on enhancing critical parts of the company's needs, such as enhanced manufacturing or enhanced discovery, uh, and which tend to take a large percentage of the energy that's produced in a nation to do those. So it's a matter of focus, Sri, and a matter of how much of the infrastructure can be modernized. Because, like I said before, it's going to take modernizing, particularly a lot of the smart grids and turning the grids into smart grids to see the greatest possible impact of this. And policies and regulatory actions will be need to be taken to do that, Sharif. So I think that's a good comment there without getting too much down into the weeds.
Mhm. Thank you. Professor David Smith, how USA utilizing this smart in energy approach in their economy? If you share, maybe it will be good example for us.
You see it used many different places in it. I can just talk, for example, around me first, then I'll expand out. My immediate area around me in Texas, we've spent a lot of time optimizing and trying to make our grid smart. Uh, One of the reasons is that we want to try to reduce greenhouse gas emission. But the other reasons, for example, for us going to smart grids is we want to increase our reliability. Um, 2 years ago, where I live, I was without electricity for 7 days because we had a massive once in 100 year, actually, it was once in a 500 year snowstorm that caused our wind turbines to quit working. It it caused our solar panels not to work because they were coated in ice and snow, and so they were not producing energy. And also our distribution system, we had transformers and things freezing during that period. So I personally was without electricity for 7 days. It's hard to do anything when you do not have electricity, and it's a danger as you look there. So part of what we did in this area with policy and others is to spend a lot of time working on a smart grid, and a lot of that was built around reliability. Um, the other area on this that I think you're going to see as part of the answer to your question is that you will see increased emphasis on the diversity of the ways that power can be generated. And that is one where I think you will see other. A great place for your viewers, Sharif, is that the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States actually has produced a very interesting publication out of their Smart Connected Systems division there that is a beginner's guide to what smart systems can be. Let me put this into the text box here, so if you want to even show parts of that, you can. Uh, it begins to help define what is a smart grid standard and how you begin the process to engage the stakeholders to set smart energy, smart grid standards and how you can do that. And it talks about why are standards so important for the smart grid itself. And like I said, you have to do it because uh, smart energy has been called electricity with a brain and others like that. But you need to have the interoperability we've talked about. You need to protect it from cyber attacks. You need to um, have others. Another really great source in that document, Sharif, is there is something called the Smart Grid Clearinghouse. And this particular document has a link that will get you into the Smart Grid Clearinghouse, which will help you find the technologies and the elements to actually implement smart grids around the world. And and so we're seeing there, and it's uh, really something that you have to put in place and put the standards in place, put the interoperabilities in place to be useful with it. Uh, and again, if you look at this, the domain here, the domain is made up of how the power is generated in so many different ways. Again, from solar, from wind, from hydro, from natural gas, from nuclear reactors and others like that, to how it's distributed. How's the transmission done? How does it work uh, with service providers, which is our model here in Texas? How does the operations work? How can you control it? How does it work in the markets? And how do the customers, the residential customers, the critical infrastructure customers, such as hospitals and others like that, how does the commercial sector, such as manufacturing, uh, how do airports and others maintain this power operation, which is so important for their operation? And you begin to see that is a key part of this, Sharif, to kind of, I hope, begin to answer that question a little bit more formally. But this National Institute of Standards and Technology publication is a great one to begin to look at it and how it can be used. The other is, I said, I hate to use United centric uh, resources, but there's also in the U.S. Department of Energy some great resources that can be used in this because, for example, if you look at the beginning of electrification, that was probably about 130 years ago. And back then, the demands were simple. We talked about with Nikola Tesla how it first was being installed as direct current, and then with his invention, it changed to alternating current. And this is makes it there. But how do you do it? How do you get to this smart grid? How can you get to the smart energy? How can you go and work in all the various areas of making sure that it can work in there? One of the areas that, Sharif, I think would be great for some of your universities and others to work on is one of the key new elements being put into smart energy is an increasing realization that we need to, with the renewable energy sources that we're using, like this solar panels and others, is that we have to discover ways to store this energy in a reliable way, in a way that it has quality and precision. You know, solar panels do not work at night. So you want to be able to take the energy that's generated from them during the day and store it so that it can be used at other times of the day to be used. The other part of smart grids, Sharif, is that there are peak energy utilization times. Like when you start firing up a factory in the morning, there's peak energy uses when you look at, for example, some of the rush hours in different communities. Uh, when people come home and all of a sudden start transferring the power grid usage from a maybe a downtown, maybe a manufacturing area back to residential areas, and that power shift changes so much. And there needs to be a lot more research and a lot more products developed on how do you, from an operational standpoint, how can you manage that? Is there a way that I can make that process more smart? Is there a way that I can uh, do digital twin type of simulations and modeling to be able to better optimize the power, to be able to make it better into smart power? And you're going to see this become a very important part of what happens going forward. Um, and you're going to see increasingly demands for smart energy management at the commercial sector. I can tell you part of our energy policy we're seeing in the United States is that we are looking at ways to help the industries, particularly the manufacturing industry and others like that, use less electricity, and and how can do that. In 2020, Deloitte did a study of some of the industry uh, companies in the United States, and well over half of them said that they want to increase increasingly sophisticated energy management at their corporate strategy level. So this is not just looking at how can I save money on the power we're purchasing or the power we're generating, but how can we look at opportunities, not just the cost reduction, but how can I look at how to become green? How can I become decarbonized? How can I become resilient? How can I begin to look at places where I can adapt energy man technologies? And can I do on-site resources such as renewable energy into micro and mini grids? How can I do energy studies? I'm sorry, energy storage. And how can I make this work within my commercial sector? If I'm, for example, Sharif, a uh, manufacturing company and uh, your part of the world there, many of them require probably tremendous electrical sources as I'm manufacturing, as I'm making steel, as I'm building materials, and I'm doing others like that. And so the ability to go to a smart energy whole ecosystem for them, it should be a wonderful opportunity there. And and how do I benefit at that level from the energy management, from the clean energy technologies? And how do I work better with our grid, and particularly ways with, like I said, not only energy storage, but something called peak shaving, that in times of peak power utilization, can I, as a manufacturing plant, cut back and make more available? Can I do grid balancing, which is the same type of thing? Can I help with, as a large consumer of power, can I optimize my paces for doing that? I can tell you, for example, in the semiconductor industry here, we see them beginning more and more often begin to look at how can I do grid balancing, because it takes a tremendous amount of electricity to do that. And the technologies that are enabling to do this even more now, right now, is the technologies we move forward to Industry 4.0, like we've talked about before in your program, which includes digital information for manufacturing processes and products. How do we do that digital transformation? How do we increasingly use the Internet of Things, the IoT, to bring widespread connectivity for everything in that place, from individual machines and production lines, heating, cooling systems, office, factory lighting, all air conditioning, all of the things there that can be managed and optimized. And it leads not only to cost savings, but greener, more flexible, more resilient power, which I think is going to be very important in this area. The other that you're going to see is the electrification of industry fleets, and how you begin to do that. Moving from petrocarbon to electricity on those is actually part of a smart energy strategy for corporations that is gaining speed. Uh, Even though Donald's not owning this today, at the Elon Musk Tesla manufacturing facility here in Austin, they're beginning to produce the all electric transport trucks to be used to replace the diesel ones that occupy space on our highways today. And that's going to be helpful as you begin to move towards some of the smart energy. But with the regulatory push, and I mean a very strong push to electric vehicles, and the fact that most of those tend to be charged at home at different times of the day, the whole smart grid and smart energy are going to have to shift to take advantage or be able to support that type of regulatory shift as we move to more of electric vehicles. And so the other thing that I do want to talk about on the policy side, Sharif, and this is going to be something that I believe is going to be very important in the developing nation, is there needs to be a concerted effort to define, roadmap, and put policy and regulations in place on something called distributed energy resources. And these are things, for example, when we're talking about the commercial buildings, there are things like on-site solar power, wind power, uh, battery storage. All of these need to find those places. We talked about mini and microgrids. Uh, this is what will be operating them, because we're going to see this as a way where they can manage this on a local basis, which is what you have to do if you can't wire these. And you're going to see them have on-site solar energy, geothermal where practical, kinetic where practical, and there's even work being done on small scale nuclear thermal reactors, which are not like the big ones, that can be used to generate power in these mini and microgrids. And there is a concept going on for interconnection in particular that is called nanogrids. And these are building level nanogrids that can connect them together in addition to the mini and microgrids there. And you know, you see small smart factories coming up everywhere in some of the elements to do it, at least in the United States. So on your policy question, also before Sharif, some of the other areas where smart energy policy can be made is, for example, in investment tax credits and production tax credits, having the governments help back energy loans uh, out of COP27 and now the Nations and now the International Development Bank and the World Bank and others. There's money being put aside for energy loans, but it needs to begin to happen, I think, at the local levels too. You're already seeing places where there are tax credits for electrical vehicles. There needs to be ways to look at energy efficiency standards and how that can be used. Uh, but the real challenge on this is, and it's one of the things we even talked about yesterday with the topic, is the average consumer doesn't see the needs for smart grids, doesn't see the need for smart energy. Uh, and so education, like in so many of your topics, Dr. Shreve, education is going to be a key element of moving towards smart energy in any country, in any region, because people need to understand the importance of it. Business leaders need to understand the importance of putting smart uh, grids and smart electricity and energy storage and things within their environment. And so that is the education is as important as policy and the technology advances to make smart energy happen, Sri. So I think that answered your question there.
Uh, thank you, Professor David Smith. My last question: that how we can train people for smart energy.
Well, Sharif, you really saved some of your harder questions for last on that, because that is a multiple area of where there's not right answers and there's not wrong answers. So, for example, if I look at the top of that food chain, multiple universities are putting in place renewable, smart, clean energy degree programs, and you will see that happening. There are things in different places where they are putting in place academies and generating materials that can be used. Um, One of the other ones, Sharif, is that you've heard of the STEM programs and the STEAM programs. Well, as we look at STEM and as we're looking at those, how can we take in place and enhance smart energy into those? I hate to use another example of my area here in Texas, but in our STEM programs for K through 12 students here, there's a program called WATT, Watchers of Texas. And it's a program to improve the energy literacy for those kids. And then hopefully by from the kids to their parents and how it can be used in that way. Another place that you're beginning to see is that you're seeing, just like for teaching people software development, you're seeing boot camps put in place to train people, for example, on how to do solar energy training, how to do wind energy training. You're seeing others on how to begin to understand the control mechanisms, which are very hard to understand. There are multiple programs across those in place. The the training is just so important. It's not just education, but it's training. You know, one of the large companies that is in this place is a company called Johnson Control, and uh, they do the energy management. I mean, it's a large organizations. For example, at the University of Texas, Johnson Control controls the power to all UT Austin actually has their own power plants and their own ways to generate power separately than the city. But what the CEO of Johnson Control says is we only have about 7 to 10 years where we have to do this and have to cut the emissions back. And there's a lot of work ahead of it. You know, the goal out of COP was to cut global emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. Well, guess what? We're not on track to cut it in half by 2030. We're actually on track for 11% increase in emissions, as we've talked about before. And buildings, for example, are responsible for nearly 40% emissions. And so, how do we do that? To those, and how do we go to the whole concept of energy sustainability and smart energy? And you know, I got to do, Sharif, is you need to work on that infrastructure. You've heard me say that everything today is becoming digital and becoming smart. Well, our energy infrastructure in all these countries needs to become digital and smart. And by doing that, it multiplies the energy emission and cost savings that you have. And the more you can monitor it, the more you can measure, the more you can make changes in optimizing it, the better you're going to be. Um, you know, the next decade are critically important in this area. And it could, if we do not take action in many places, it could change our lives forever and the lives of our children's children. Uh, you know, I know the Paris Accord had deadlines for there. We're on path on some of these, but a lot more is needed. You've got to have that global cooperation, like we have talked about before. Because if I change something in my city, it doesn't change it for my region. If I change it in my state, it doesn't change it for the country. If I change it in one country, the countries around me have to also be changed at the same time. So this is something that has to have a global focus, and it works under the concept that we've talked about often on your program of systems of systems. Smart energy is a fantastic definition of a systems of systems approach. And to be successful, we have to apply that systems of systems approach to how to solve the problems of sustainability and how to implement smart energy, not only just in our own community, but around our country and the globe. So, Sharif, I think that's an answer to your question.
Thank you. Yes, Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, Sharif, I enjoy being on your programs. Being the only speaker is a tough one, but I hope we did an okay job today. I also hope we can understand that what is necessary in areas like this is innovation. We need entrepreneurs working to solve these problems. We need research at not only universities and colleges, but also in corporations and governments to solve these problems. The governments within each of these countries and regions must create policies and must create regulations that help promote this. The funding sources are key and critical. The growth of smart grids to not only optimize but become more resilient and to increase the efficiency are vitally important. That, and I believe strongly that governments should help encourage these changes, but also promote the establishment of the public private partnerships that are necessary to implement uh, many microgrids and the incentives to corporations and others to do it. I think if you look that solar power and wind power are often mentioned as some of the leading generation sources for this future of smart energy. We also have to invest in new ways to store that energy. And Sharif, I think that storage modalities are going to be easier to innovate, to implement developing countries than they are in developed countries because the capital investments to experiment, the capital investments to replace old infrastructure with new infrastructure in developing nations is higher than what we have in the developed world. So, Sharif, I think that's my closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent sessions. Personally, I learned a lot from today's session. I request our audience, please share our content with your government agency, corporation, and academy. And through this process, hopefully, we can enhance the capacity of the human resources, especially for the global communities, especially for the emerging economy. Definitely, the developed nations helping this World Talent Economy Forum, and we are developing many interesting projects. I think Tom in right now in Dhaka is visiting our projects, our smart city projects, our agricultural projects, our energy projects. So all of our dialogues, we are taking it as a learning opportunity, and what we learn, we execute in the real world. So I believe those who join as a speaker for World Talent Economy Forum, they play a visionary role for all of that emerging economy. Thank you, Professor David Speak, for your excellent contributions for our Talent Economy Forum. And I'm sure what you are teachings to our communities, they are executing in the real life. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.